Started. Good morning and good local time, everyone. It is Thursday, right before holidays, where most everybody's out for the end of the year. Thursday, December 22nd, and today is the 1.5 retrospective for Kubernetes. So Jason has graciously offered to facilitate again and has done a great job. He dropped the link into the chat, and let's just go from here.
Great. So thanks for the handoff. So just a quick run through about how this works. Essentially, we're going to go through the retrospective document that I pasted a link to. If you don't have it, I'm also going to drop it in the Kubernetes community meeting in Kubernetes dev. Actually, it's still there. So basically, what I want to do is establish a few working agreements that as we're going through the meeting, we want to make sure that we're really constructive in terms of how we approach them. This time, this release, I think we had some things that were tricky and tough, and I want to make sure that we're addressing them in a really positive way. And so the working agreements that we've sort of stuck to the last few retros have been to be respectful in our communication to one another, and when you are not speaking, to mute. And because we've got a pretty packed retrospective document that we're going to be going through, please keep an eye on the time boxes that are on the right-hand side of each of the major items we'll go through. And lastly, if you put down an improvement or a delta, because those are things that can be a little bit difficult to speak to as a moderator, I'll probably ask you to speak to your points so that we can make sure that we understand what you meant in the item. So just briefly, I want to go through the follow-up from the 1.4 retro. And these are things that when we were doing the 1.4 retro, we identified as possible areas for improvement. And I just want to get a consensus-based idea if we actually did do these things. And when I say consensus-based, I mean that if you don't speak up about these things, we're going to make the assumption that these were improvements. So if there are things that are in this list that you feel like we really fell down on or didn't do a good job on, I'd love for, after reading the list, for us to have a quick discussion about that. So big things here: address the P0 flakes during the dev cycle and get better visibility. Close out stale and open issues. Correct documentation for version skew. Version skew tests we have should remain passing through the dev cycle. Define where spare release capacity exists. Feature complete definition means no open known issues, or there are exceptions written and it has tests. Testing at scale with more cloud providers. Issue owners need to be represented and also update documentation. Update issue every 24 hours once code freeze is started. Need to get help for Enrud from Google, who runs the queue on Google Infra. Implement webhooks or other method in the submit queue. And community management group codified, a group of people who herd cats. So if there's any of these that need discussion or follow-up, or if we want to bring these forward into this retro, you all have the floor for the next couple minutes.
Would it be worthwhile to go through item by item?
We could. We don't have a real long time box on this.
Okay.
In fact, there's a ton of stuff in the new what could be better, so I'd love to make sure we focus on. So
sure. So
anybody?
Real quick.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think the version skew testing issues still existed in 1.5. I think we did improve on what was it pointed out, the submit queue stuff. So I think Anirudh did get help there. As far as I know there were no major submit queue issues. We did get the community involved to help herd the cat, so to speak. We can definitely improve more there, but Dims and Caleb were very much involved in helping triage bugs. The issues around bug triage in general, things like closing out stale open issues, I think this is still it's still an issue, but the release team did a pretty good job of going through release blocking, or basically 1.5 milestone issues, and constantly pinging owners to try to get issues closed or moved out of the blocking path. So that, I think, improved to some extent. But there's a lot of open items for bug triage that we listed below that we can discuss.
Great. Okay. Anybody else have some commentary here? I went ahead and moved the items you said that are still happening into what can be improved. Okay, I'm sure some of these things are going to come up too as we move forward. So let's do the fun part, which is what went well. Looks like, Aaron, maybe you have some things here to start out with?
Sure, yeah. Hopefully you all can hear me. I think that from my perspective, the release branch for 1.5 was cut early, and I never heard any complaints about provisioning infrastructure for the 1.5 release. That's really cool. That was awesome. Like, that has definitely been a hurdle every other release. So thank you so much for that. And then I think the other thing for me personally as an outsider, the Burndown meetings continue to be super awesome and effective. It is the best way for me to find out what is happening about the release. I think the cadence of the way the cadence sort of ramped up on the way to release was good. I think that's a good thing to continue. I'm trying to say all the good things here, but just the piece of feedback on the Burndown meetings might be like, we never actually had documented action items that were sent out to a list of people after the fact. So if you showed up at the meeting, you got all the info. If you weren't there, you totally missed out. And I feel like it would be great to sort of document what we discussed and what we're doing going forward. And I think Saad did a really good job of doing that in sort of the action items list. Like that was kept up to date, and that was very informative, but we didn't broadcast that so much.
So it was more of a pull method because it was all in the notes document as opposed to a broadcast method. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But like, seriously, that was super awesome. Those notes were so much more informative than they ever have been. Thank you so much, Saad.
Cool. Just as a quick follow-up on that, do we want to put an action item in the list about how we better transmit that information? Should we do a community meeting update weekly or biweekly or whatever that?
So, I mean, I maybe am jumping the gun here, but I feel like there was a document that Dan put together about sort of codifying what all the roles are that people need to fulfill within the release cycle. And I think that documenting who is responsible for broadcasting information and how they should do that would be a really useful addition to that document.
Is Dan on this call?
I am, yeah. I can link the document in the chat.
Yep, or add the topic to it. Thanks, Dan.
Will do?
I said, or add the topic, yeah.
Cool. Consider yourself nominated as a to-do item, the first one. All right. Any other positives here? It looks like CM, somewhat ambiguous.
Caleb Miles.
Yeah, the GitHub PM group that Brian created was super helpful. Before could not. It was really helpful for triaging bugs. Like I couldn't add labels before or remove like people who were assigned who were no longer part of the project. So that was really nice to expand the franchise a little bit. People who can work the mechanics of the GitHub repo.
Great. Saad, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, so issue triage was definitely an issue, and there's more about that later, but compared to the previous releases, it was much better. Part of it was instead of one person doing it, there was a team of us, including Dims and Caleb. And we also kind of improved the process a little bit by making sure that we had release blocker. We consistently used the release blocker labels to figure out what was and what was not in the release blocking path. And that kind of gave us a very high level view of what's going on and whether we're able to launch or not. Second item is that last minute release blocking issues were handled really well, especially the CPU soft lockup issue, which could have delayed the release by weeks possibly. We had a bunch of folks who jump on it with a bunch of really hard repros, and they worked very hard to get them resolved quickly. So that was really appreciated.
And I think the key point in what you said, Saad, is we did so much better in 1.5 than 1.4 in so many ways, and there's still a lot we can do, which is, it's just awesome to see the continual progress, even as we are critical and say, hey, we can still do better.
Yeah. It's and then compare that, if you go back and look at the 1.3 retro notes, we are trending up on all these key blockers, which is good. Anybody else want to add anything? The Dev Summit, I think that personally is a great thing for us to add to our quiver of arrows in terms of how we manage the product. Any commentary on that?
Only one question. Are we going to run this Dev Summit during KubeCon in Berlin?
No, we are not doing it, Ihor, in Berlin. We didn't have enough people that said, yes, they could potentially attend and would be interested. Enough of the core dev team initially to do it again. We're looking at doing a Kubernetes leadership summit in probably the first half of next year, and then another Kubernetes dev summit at KubeCon in Austin in November.
Awesome, I get it.
Yep.
Cool. All right, so let's get into the meat of the topic there.
I just had a quick comment on the Dev Summit. We didn't, and I'm sure Sarah can sympathize with this, we didn't have dedicated note takers, so it was totally up to the discretion of the person running a given session whether or not notes actually got released. And for me, the Dev Summit was the meatiest part of KubeCon. We talked about so much. It was awesome. It was great. But only some of it was documented, and only the right mailing list to look at, right? So,
all right. Well, invite me next time, and I'll be the note taker. How about that?
You've learned to try locate. That's awesome. I need the secret.
It's still experimental.
Okay.
So here we go. Aaron, looks like you've got point number 1 on this, and maybe another one after that. So fire away.
Okay, so I step up as the dude who wrote release notes. I missed a couple breaking changes. There's only one that I have an issue that I can link to, and that is that the binaries are no longer included in the Kubernetes tar.cheesy binary, release tarball, right? So I don't know about the rest of you. I assumed when I downloaded that, I got everything, and that has now changed. And I totally missed that in the release notes. It turns out there was a syntax error that prevented that from getting caught in the release notes, but also I'm a human being and I read through as much as I could, but I missed this as an implication. I also didn't beta test, so if I had been beta testing or alpha testing, I may have caught this sooner. So it's just this to me. I was recently at a conference where we're sort of trying to write the test for how you get certified for Kubernetes, and everybody was surprised about this change. Nobody knew this was coming. It fundamentally changes how you have to deal with the release artifact, or maybe where you get the release artifacts from. And I feel like I missed that. And then there were a couple other things that I don't have links to. For example, I think persistent volumes have gone from alpha to beta in the last release, and all the alpha stuff may have gotten dropped. I'm not sure, but it seems like the default storage class of anything no longer exists anywhere. You now have to pre-create that. And this is something I couldn't find in issues or docs or release notes. I haven't grabbed through enough source code to figure out what changed when. But just speaking as the guy who wrote the release notes, I feel like I did a poorer job this time of catching action required changes. But I think that we as a community didn't really help me find the right things at the right time. And I'm trying to understand how we can better identify these things. So I said beta and alpha testing earlier. I think somehow incentivizing that. I've heard talk of calling these things release candidates instead of alphas or betas. I don't know like what sort of cred we could do for that, but I think that like getting plain people in front of actual releases that have changed a little bit would probably help. Okay, so the other thing that apparently
can I interrupt and take that to a meta level and a meta theme for us? Because
Please.
basically documentation earlier, release notes earlier, reviews of betas earlier, so that because the 1.5.1 change fit exactly in this point. If more eyes had been looking at the change of the defaults, then we would have had, because we almost as soon as we released, somebody went, hey, this is a complicated set of defaults that defaults open, so we need to pay attention. So I think the whole meta of this is earlier documentation, earlier testing of betas, and more feedback from the community on betas, documentation, and release notes.
Yeah, another thing that comes to mind too is that so SIGs that have a stake in some of these things. So I think for me, as part of now the leadership in SIG cluster ops, this is an operator problem. I mean, if I had build steps for those that relied on those binaries being in a certain way, then that should have been something. Hey, cluster operators, guess what's going to be coming down the pipe for you? So SIGs that have a stake in some of these release notes, we need to do a better job of radiating those to our interest communities and make sure that they're getting publicized that way as well. So it's not just getting it documented or making sure it's there, it's getting the information to the right audiences. And
interacting with it ahead of time,
Yeah, exactly. I think that's maybe my point, is that I have gotten some criticism or commentary from folks that have looked at the release notes as the gate for breaking changes. And that is not the right gate. Sorry, it just isn't. It's one gate. We should have defense in depth here. And so incentivizing the community to actually test this stuff ahead of time, getting the right people accountable for testing stuff. Maybe it's through SIGs. Yeah, I agree. But like I don't think we did as good of a job of that this time.
So one thing I want to clarify here is the process of getting release notes out is compiling the release notes, and that's what Aaron was responsible for, and he did an awesome job on that. The second part is making sure that the right data is fed into the release notes process, and that's where I think this whole thing fell apart a little bit. And that's not Aaron's fault at all. That's not something he's responsible for. Ultimately, it's the responsibility of the devs who make the changes to make sure that they're feeding it into the right pipeline. That didn't happen in a few cases, and I'm guessing that's because we don't have the process in place to do that. We do have the release note label on the PRs to be able to say, this is something that should be called out in the release notes. I'm not sure whether that process needs to be improved but we could have a wider discussion. Something needs to be done here so that any big breaking changes get called out very loudly and boldly and are fed into the person compiling the release notes. The person compiling the release notes definitely should not be responsible, though, to make sure that everything is there, that they capture everything. That's the responsibility of the person who makes the change.
Just a few words from me. So as we've done during this release, and we also made this during the previous release, so Aaron has been using the single source of truth, that table that I've been maintaining and collecting that information from the features repo and from the core repo where these changes were implemented. So I agree with Aaron that we have to move like the deadlines for reviewing all this stuff, and we have to work with the single source of truth regarding that. So people who are implementing the changes have to be responsible for making sure that these changes are really correct. At the same time, I suppose that we shouldn't drop this process that we had before. We simply have to make it better. We shouldn't change majorly anything here. So I'm in general, I'm satisfied how it did happen here. But we have to simply implement. We have to simply make it better, and that's all.
Great. Thanks, Igor.
Okay, I feel like maybe that dovetails into the next thing I'm on the
Yeah, I
hook
was just
for,
gonna say.
which is eHorse spreadsheet was the only source of truth I could refer to. The features repo, in my opinion, needs to die in a fire. Completely unusable. I dare you to check any of the 1.5 features and tell me which one of them actually have checkboxes that were checked off. Because there were actually a couple. I'm surprised. Some people did do it, and thank you so much to those of you who did. But very, very few people actually followed this process. It is not machine parsable at the moment. Like, maybe that's something we should just improve our tools to do. But like, it is really, really difficult to work with that repo. It means almost nothing to me. The spreadsheet meant everything to me in terms of tracking who was actually on the hook and what they were shipping. I really want to hear from other product folks, like, how did you find the features repo useful? How can we make this situation better?
I'd like to say a few words here. So I totally agree with you that this issues template hasn't been filled appropriately in 95% of the issues. So currently, as we have discussed during the previous community meeting, currently I'm working on the new version of the issues template. I'm going to make it much simpler and much easier for people to update, maintain, and that's all. I'm going to submit the PR with the new version after the new year, and I'll be appreciated if community will review it and approve, in the final version, how should it be in the real world. Because this issue template that we have at the moment is awesome, but it doesn't work. That is the problem. So we have to do something that will be much easier for people to feel and for us as the consumers of these features to work with it. And after that, these spreadsheets will be much easier to maintain because it was big, not pain, but it wasted a lot of my time to collect all the information from the features repo to the spreadsheet to make it usable for people like Aaron who are collecting this information into something like release notes. So yeah, we have to make features repo much more user friendly.
I feel like there's a related thread to this. It's kind of the way I think about project sort of management, like tooling and repositories of information. I think the spreadsheet was fantastic, but it doesn't stand in place for the ability to get timely status updates about the progress of any feature that's being worked on for the project.
And that was more the idea of what the features repo was. Are we to this level in the checklist, but it hadn't been being used? Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't, even with the shorter template, I think there's still, it should be someone's responsibility or some group of people's responsibility if a feature has been proposed and accepted by a SIG to get kind of continuous feedback on that. Because it seems, at least to me, in kind of like a naive understanding of the features, at least the ones that go into SIG node, that many of the features have effectively a bus factor of 1, which is not fantastic. And it makes things like generating release notes or triaging issues and flakes very difficult, because if that person is gone or is leaving the project or is on vacation, then it just goes into the ether and is gone.
So I know eHor is working on a refined template. Can the PM group broadly, as an action item, work on refining the features process so that we have a better ongoing view, and then finding out and working with, maybe even just building a document around expectations for the feature owners, the feature champions, and then the SIG owners of the features? Because that way, if we set the expectations, we are more likely to actually address them and work against that, and we have a way to measure if it's successful or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So that is another thing that we're currently working on, and I appreciate it if PM group will help me in receiving the ideas and collecting that in the understandable form. Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Sarah. It seems like I just joined in time.
Hey, Aparna.
Hi, Prana.
Yeah, so we would like more mid-track sort of
Information.
information.
Yeah, on features specifically. So having the PM group come up with what the expectations are around whatever the new evolved features repo template is, and then we can measure and making it less broadly someone should do this, and more broadly or more specifically, the SIG champion or the SIG group will be ultimately responsible for this, or the champion of the feature will be ultimately responsible, or, and if this is not updated, then we will potentially not take your code.
Yeah, so I want to really jump on that real fast. Like, what is the stick we can use?
Right,
Because
what is the
I
stick?
saw some things sneak in, like,
Yeah.
at the last second. And, like, it's cool, whatever. I totally understand you're in a difficult situation. You have a feature to ship. Totally. You're cool to sneak in. We shouldn't do that. That's not
Yeah.
okay. Like, if we set hard rules, we should actually abide by those. Everybody should abide by those. We should all be held accountable. But could we please say what those rules are?
So yes, the PM group needs to define what the rules are, and then we have to put sticks behind them.
Yeah, we have to absolutely document that, because we don't have
Exactly.
this like draft for the release with estimated date and so on, and like initial described responsibilities, but without any details. So we have to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I agree. It was difficult to define what those sticks are, and there's no real. I mean, there's some authority, I suppose. I think that the main things that we have is we can say, hey, from a documentation perspective, here's the deadline, and if you don't have your pieces in, then it won't go into documentation, and therefore it won't be easy for users to discover. The other is, I mean, we have a release leader or czar, whatever it is now, and so we can say that this won't go into the release. I think those are two. I'm open to other ideas.
Yeah, well, I don't think that this is the group to have that conversation. I think the whole PM group should be deciding what it is, because ultimately in many of the organizations, the PMs are responsible for getting the individual features in to further their corporate goals. So you guys have to figure out some way that you're okay with as carrots and sticks and feature tracking. And again, we have to do this as a community, as an agreement, so that we can all hold each other to this standard, not any one particular corporate way.
You're right, and I totally agree. And while we're thinking about sticks, also think about rights. So not just responsibilities, but the rights and people of the developers themselves.
Yep.
Right?
A lot of that work is happening in the governance conversations that are happening. There's a governance.md that is in draft form that is worth looking at and offering commentary on.
Cool. So I added a to-do item specifically for the PM group to better define the rules and corresponding sticks. I don't know what else to say for that.
Make features better.
Make features better.
Yeah.
Better defined and better tracked, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
I think like really articulating and defining when the release czar has the power to say no, and let's respect that authority, because that's why they're called a czar. They should.
Except they're not anymore.
They're not anymore. They're not called those are anymore. What are they called, Sarah?
Major release lead manager, major release manager, and patch release manager of the major release team and the patch release team.
Okay, manager.
The
Release
major
manager.
respect that they deserve. Then.
Yeah.
Major respect.
Yeah.
Okay, so the PM group will plan to meet early in January and come up with some of these guidelines. I think it would be good to have our previous release managers, major release managers, in that meeting to give us some input.
There's a list of them on the web.
Yeah, we'll invite them.
And Aparna, can you make sure that, or Sarah and Aparna, that when that meeting happens and there's some outcomes from that we just do a quick update in the community meeting?
Yes, of course.
So
yeah.
we see what happened. Okay, so moving right along there, Brian Grant had a thing I pulled out from the community meeting minutes, essentially that we need more concise templates and auto-close things that are not filled in. I feel like that work sort of started, but Aaron, do you want to speak to that? Or
It also ties in with
Well, so I mean,
future work.
like, I don't know how have other people felt about the template for PRs in the main Kubernetes repo? Because that's something I don't interact with on a day-to-day basis, and I feel like more of you probably do. Do you actually use that? Do you fill it in? Do you read it?
Hey, this is Garrett here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm getting a notice that if Zoom can't hear it, but the feedback that I've heard from a number of people is that most of them just delete the PR template and don't use it at all, which is problematic for a couple of reasons. One is we can use it to set the release note label automatically. There is a munger that does that. But two, any information that we want to convey to people, like the contributor guidelines are in there. There's a link to that. There's a getting started, like a link to getting started. All of that just kind of gets deleted. Like step one, when I open a PR, is delete that template, which sort of means we need to rework the template. So as part of contributor experience, I created a GitHub project to try and track some of these tasks. I just did this yesterday. I have like learning how GitHub projects work, and it's sort of the Scrum-like methodology where you've got swim lanes. But I'm hoping to get someone to work on that. I think we can, that seems like a reasonable stick to me, that if you're a member of the org and you know that a release note label needs to be set, or you know that the PR template should be filled out, if we can detect that you haven't filled it out, just close it until you do. And I think that can change behavior without being too drastic, because it's not something that's totally out of your control. You just go back and recopy the template in, or open a new PR and modify the template. Yeah, Alejandro suggested that. Yeah, something. I don't want it to auto delete it. Maybe just close it. Yeah, I know that's a big discussion too. So anyway, those are the thoughts that I had on it. I think it does need to be reworked, and I've got a PR open in, I guess, no, I haven't submitted it yet, sorry. But I'm working on updating the pull request template, and any feedback is certainly welcome. But I like the idea of closing issues automatically that aren't routed correctly. So once we decide on a very clear and clean routing mechanisms for opening issues, if we have some indication that you should know how it should be routed, meaning it should have an area / label or a sig / label, and if you have the power to do so, then we should auto close the issue. Same with PRs. If you're not using the template correctly, we can have the bot check, like Alejandro suggested, and auto close it. Not delete it, just close it, and then you can reopen and modify as necessary.
So let me jump in with Aaron's member of the org thing. I recommend that everyone go read governing.md and comment on it, because we're working on trying to define just what that is. What is a member of the org? What do you do and get member of the org privileges? What are the different roles in the community? So go take a look at governing.md.
Could you put a link to it?
Yes, I've got 3 of those now. I will put that in there in just a second.
Oh, I see that.
Great. Okay, so moving along, it looks like Saad, you have a little bit here that do you want to cover that? Because this one was, again, Brian is not here.
So Brian posted that we need to create breathing room for leads, so they are not reviewing features all the time, maybe rate limit features. How do we make this more manageable? My comment on this is that one of the complaints that we got from devs this release was that code review bandwidth was limited. So some features missed the feature complete deadline because they couldn't get code reviewed in time. So you've got kind of these competing problems, one of not having enough code review bandwidth, the other leads being overloaded. I'm not sure what the right answer here is.
Okay. That feels like a pretty serious issue, just generally speaking, about how we're allocating bandwidth. Sarah, what do you think about maybe creating some sort of discussion session in community about how we address this? Or is this something that we want to deal with at the leadership level and try and brainstorm, or what's your feelings on that?
I think the answer is both. It's worth putting on the agenda for the community meeting and having a conversation about it. And then I think there's going to be a broader leadership discussion in upcoming days about how to figure this as well as Alexander says, probably also an opportunity for bot improvements, and there absolutely is.
Yeah, this is actually the one thing that has come up every release. There's always somebody who's overburdened, and then there's areas where things just can't be addressed because people are just spread too thin. So,
on the plus side, the bottleneck it seems to over the last releases to have been moving around a bit, which means we're fixing some things.
Yep.
So that's good. Good progress and plenty of space for more. So,
well, I'll have to read the goal. All right. So, Caleb, you want to hit the next one?
Yeah, this was mostly an apology. I failed to start the drumbeat of flakes and issue triage at the beginning of the release cycle. I think I started a little bit too late, but it was very helpful to have DIMs in there, and we were able to, burn down that large pile of flake bugs. But not being able to do, again, continuous kind of project management, I think certainly makes the release more difficult to get out the door. And that goes, that's both features like bugs that were opened by humans and the kind of the flakiness of the CI system itself.
Okay. Looks like you've got the next few ones. Do you want to just roll for a bit?
Yeah, sure. So again, when going to try and triage these flake issues or, issue opened by a human, or trying to find out the status of a feature or get release notes on it, it would be really helpful to have multiple channels of communication. I know that GitHub notifications for some class of project members, like your Brian Grant, are just not useful anymore. I know that some other people are very responsive over like Google Hangouts or Slack, but it's a mix. So it seems at least that if you have a feature that is supposed to be worked on in the milestone, or you have an issue assigned to you, there should be contact information available, not probably publicly, but to a limited group of people who can alert you that there are things you need to be looking at or you should be looking at.
So almost a definition in like Ehor's spreadsheet of best way to reach you in a pinch on a feature.
Right. Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
And fallback methods. I think also, like to some of the work that Elsie and Brian are trying to do with corporate affiliation, it would be useful to have that information, because if you're not responsive,
you can escalate. Yeah.
Yeah, to escalate to someone from your company, because many of the features come in have corporate sponsorship, so it's kind of a little silly that you don't have that kind of lever. And it's not even a stick; it's like a soft. Soft.
It's management.
Cool. So there's an action item in there now of contact information for feature owners, quote, in case of emergency. So an emergency is probably a little bit arbitrary, but we'll find a good balance there. So it looks like you've got a fairly lengthy...
yeah, I could summarize that real quick. Cool. So just to echo a lot of what Caleb was saying, for bug triage, one of the big challenges that we had was the identifying what bugs should be part of the milestone. And we kind of had no good way to do that, because there's over 4,000 issues opened on GitHub for Kubernetes. And so we relied basically on the community. Hopefully they mark the appropriate issue with the 1.5 milestone, or if we saw some flakes in CI, we'd go in and manually make sure that they were marked with 1.5 milestones. So that process needs to be improved to make sure that the issues that are supposed to be part of the milestone are marked appropriately. Once the issues were marked with a 1.5 milestone, we had a fairly good mechanism to be able to triage them as release blocking or non-release blocking by keeping track of them with the labels. But the problem with that was getting people to take a look at these issues. Issues that were created by humans were generally pretty easy to find people to take a look at and classify as release blocker or not. But issues that are automatically created were really hard to find owners for. especially if the issues were these so-called bucket automated bugs, which were things like build failures or many tests failed. They basically all get lumped into one giant bug, and you end up seeing like a flurry of failures, and then that goes away, and you see another flurry of failures, and trying to get someone to investigate that is really, really difficult. And this actually leads into the last point, which was in general, we need more community involvement here as well to help investigate, debug, and triage flaky tests. I think in the end, it was mostly folks from Google that jumped on these to basically move them out of the blocking path. So that's my TLDR on bug triage. A lot of improvement needed there.
I think we also need to do a lot of enablement there as well, because I think people don't feel that they understand how to bug triage. And so you and Philip did a debugging session that Dim's made a huge help on as well. And we should do more things like that.
Yeah, and I guess like I asked this question in chat, but I've heard the automated issues are a lot of noise. Do they ever actually do anything useful for people?
Yes, they do. So the problem with automated issues is that sometimes they uncover real issues. So like the CPU soft lock issue was a random flake that was ignored for a long time. But when somebody, Dawn, who is awesome, jumped on one of these issues and started digging in, she realized, wait, there is a major issue here. And a bunch of these automated issues are caused by the same underlying issue. And that was something that we then marked as a release blocker, escalated, and fixed. So they are definitely useful, but there is a lot of noise. So the signal to noise ratio is not great. That needs to be improved. Talking to the test infrastructure folks, I think one of their priorities is to try to improve that signal. They're doing a bunch of things like reducing the number of large bucket bugs. So try to tease those apart if at all possible. But there's still a lot of improvement that needs to be done in this area.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I guess like I want us to consider if there are other ways we could have caught the same thing. Could we have gotten the same signal elsewhere? Because it sounds like there is some value, but it also sounds like it's really high noise. And triaging the noise down is not just a technical problem. It's very much a human problem. So the test infra team will only be able to do but so much on this. But like if it's useful, then we should definitely try to improve it.
Yeah, right now I think the benefit is there. So
as long as it's net positive, that's a good thing. But is there any, so Aaron or Saad, is there anything specifically that we can do to kind of help increase the signal to noise ratio?
I think this idea that was tossed around of having SIG owners for tests instead of just individual owners would be nice. And also having some sort of person to escalate to within each corporation would be pretty awesome. That way, folks like Caleb and Dims and me who are trying to go through these bugs and trying to find owners would have someone to escalate to when we don't get responses. At least those are some small steps that we could take to help improve the process.
Great. Sounds like maybe explicitly defining SLOs on reviewers' response time is something that's useful for humans and something that can be automated via a bot as well.
Yeah, I think the problem here is, again, what's the stick that we have, and we really don't have a lot of great sticks. So,
I think to Aaron's point about it's both a human and technical challenge. The idea that only Google or only the project itself has the infrastructure to run the end-to-end tests is not a helpful concept moving into the next, several, future releases. This is where many of these issues are generated from. And one can imagine that if you had more eyes on more, people running the end-to-end test themselves, that some of these issues would be caught more quickly than the slow P3 to P2 to P1, P0 escalation path that we have now, just relying on the automated tool. but I think, yeah, definitely in, the next year, thinking about the human technological, two sides of the same problem coin, I think will be helpful for us.
Aaron threw a
yeah,
check in here.
Aaron, so 15 minutes left. Do we want to skip talking about what we're going to do differently, or do you want to save that for next week? Or actually, next week's canceled, so I'm of the mind that we should just barrel through this. Any other critical things that we need to that we missed this release, or things that could have gone better? I think just as an observer of a lot of the things that we're saying, I think that a steel thread from when you think of a feature to the moment it's implemented and all the ways in which it gets implemented, there's at any given point, there needs to be some clear chain of ownership or custody for everything that is always accessible, or whoever is responsible for it as custody is accessible. So maybe we need some sort of steel thread initiative to really look at the entire life cycle of a feature from birth to when it gets deprecated, and assign some sort of chain of custody or something like that. I think that might, just seeing it in a holistic way, because otherwise things just sort of drift off into the landscape and they lose context. So that's maybe something I would say is something we should look at. So moving along to what we're going to do differently. Looks like more non-Googlers and release specific roles. I'm not sure who put that on there, but plus 1,000 for that.
That was me, and that was just because, again, Dan put that, and Dan and Caleb have been shopping the document around. I think that's been a really wonderful doc that just sort of spells out, like, how do you even release a Kubernetes? Like, let alone Google or not, like, just defining, like, who needs to be in the room when is super helpful. So the more of that we can do, the better.
Cool. Ihor, you got some good stuff here. You want to speak to those?
Well, I've just noticed that there is a document, again, regarding releasing Kubernetes outside of Google that mostly covers my items that I pasted into this document. So the general idea that we have to define the role team that manages the release. So this is mostly described in this document, so we can go ahead into discussing the document at all. Just not duplicating every item that we have discussed that Aaron has highlighted and so on.
It seems like not only roles and responsibilities, but also accountabilities is being a big thing there. So you got the next one?
Yeah, so this was, I think a lot of the frustration we had was around trying to figure out what features are and are not part of the release, especially as we approach feature complete date, because the feature repo, like Aaron said, was completely useless. So I thought it might be worthwhile to have some sort of feature burndown meeting prior to feature complete. After the feature complete date, we start the regular release burndown, which keeps track of blocking issues and things like that. But prior to that, perhaps it'll be useful to have maybe a weekly meeting or twice a week to keep track of what features are going into the milestone, how they're tracking, and whether they're going to make the feature complete deadline or not. That way we're not scrambling at the last minute to figure out what is and is not part of the release. Probably a question for the PM team.
Sad, I like that idea. I just wonder what's the stick if you don't make the, if you don't have your feature in the feature, because feature complete date is much, much earlier than, it's like a few weeks into the release cycle.
No, sorry. When I mean feature complete date, I mean the code freeze date.
Oh, code freeze. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So you're not talking about the date for submitting all your features. Got it.
No. Yeah, so I imagine these meetings would begin when the whatever the date is that the feature should be in the repo, and it should go until the code freeze date.
Okay. Yeah, I like that idea.
Yep.
So basically, like, I shouldn't be drafting release notes anymore. It should be Kubernetes PM. Like, basically, you should write the release notes for the release. And if you're not that confident that your feature is actually going to ship by, let's call it code freeze, code slush, whatever, like, let's define that date though, like, then it's not in. And use that as the stick, I guess. Like, give them responsibility, give them power, and then let them define what the release is actually. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Like so far, I think what we've done every release is we've started to distribute the responsibility for various parts of the release. And release notes, I think, is one part that we haven't done that yet. Aaron, you've been like heroically taking on most of that role. So to break that down and distribute that responsibility makes perfect sense. And if we can improve the process to make that happen, then let's do that.
I think there's one thing which is a quality review of the release notes. Aaron, have you been writing them, or have you been collecting them and then refining them?
So I basically solicit, collect, refine, edit as much as I can, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is from a feature perspective, the definition of what the feature is and why it should matter to people should be known by product managers far ahead of when code complete it actually occurs, right? Like, so developers definitely need to be in the mix for known issues and action required and really complicated stuff. But to define like why this thing is a thing I want to brag about is not, there's no developer input required for that. So I feel like really it's the responsibility of the feature owners, and I don't know if that's, you know, Kubernetes PM or some group, but let's give that group that responsibility and say by this date, maybe that's even the feature freeze date, like the release notes actually have to be drafted. And it's cool because we can revise the release notes later via pull requests thanks to the process that Saad helped me put in place, right? But like it definitely has to come from that group, not from the developers.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that group is a group of non-developers. For example, if you think about, there are a lot of features in this release that the value proposition is written in the GitHub proposal or in the design doc.
Yeah, that thing I don't look at. Sorry, I look at the spreadsheets. So like seriously, like the value proposition is not a thing that I should have to comprehend as the release notes writer, right? It's totally something that the group should talk about and collaborate on and come to a consensus on. It's not something a single person should just come up with. So
yes, I agree with you.
That's what I'm talking about.
I agree with you. I mean, I have the same challenge actually. When I write, for example, the launch blog post, it's the same thing, right? It's like the information is scattered in a lot of different places, and actually the spreadsheet does a good job of pulling it together. And I think the process, it sounds like it's maybe not working, but the process has been that, or supposed to be, that the owners of each of the features are supposed to input that information, to begin with in the features repo, and then when they're done with the feature, into the release notes and the spreadsheet. And so I think we need to enforce that.
Well, this is the refining the features repo process and template and expectations, and then writing up clear expectations of what it takes to get a feature from I've put it in the feature repo all the way to it is in the release and the release notes. So like what and who has, because developers have coding role, but who handles the release, who defines the release note? What is the feature owner, or can't remember, shepherd or champion, going to be the person who is responsible to, or responsible for making sure that, all of the code, like who is responsible for what components of this at what point in time in the cycle. So this is what we asked the PM group to go through and define and bring forward in the discussion to the community after Ihor goes through and does a first pass on the template and, a bunch of who is in charge of what to get a feature released is what I think we need at this point. Because once we have the expectations written down, then we can apply carrots and sticks to it and say, if you don't have this by this date, your code will be backed out or whatever.
Yeah, I'd like, so from my perspective, this is like the field of responsibility for the product managers. So, like in ideal world, as a product manager, like some person or set of people have to define the features that they would like to see in this release. They would keep on track on the like making these features happen in this release, and like mostly tracking and maintaining the whole release process. So this is the field responsibility of the specific product management people.
Yep, which is roughly why I asked for the process out of the PM group, and then the wrangling we can figure out, do we need a feature manager for each release? That person's role is to track all of what the product managers and features are handling for each session. Basically, we just need more process around this so it doesn't, so that there are reasons that things get completed and we know where to look for the information.
I'm happy to volunteer as a person to handle that, and I'm happy to volunteer as a person who will document that as we have initially discussed.
Excellent. Thank you, Igor.
My only request in that regard is just that we try and keep it agile. So, I mean, you can wrap a process around anything, but let's try and get rapid feedback on how the process is working before the next retro if we can, or find some way to get that feedback faster.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that.
Well, my concrete ask would be the release notes draft file that I created for 1.5 is something that somebody from the Kubernetes PM group should create for 1.6. That's the way that I would state it. Like, it shouldn't be, I mean, maybe it's a release notes manager that creates that, but maybe it could be the decision of the Kubernetes PM group prior to feature freeze to then commit that file, and that's the checkpoint that we use to demark when we move forward from there.
Can you do me a favor? Can you actually put exactly what your ask is in the action items and make somebody claim it?
I can put the ask in. I'm not sure if I can make anybody claim it.
You look like you're strong enough to,
Influence. It's all about influence.
Look, it's just a beard. I got it. It's a big beard. I hear it.
And Caleb,
okay.
I'm going to address Caleb's comment about conflation between project, program, and product. And the answer is we did that intentionally. We said that the PM group handles those components, and I don't know how much of program there is in there because it's more project and product that we put together in there, but that is something we chose. If it needs to look different, then we need to propose to something different.
Oh, not that the group is the wrong grouping of roles, but the essence of what the product manager does about communicating, the why we're doing this, and talking with the various stakeholders externally and internally is slightly different than the project manager who works on the mechanics of the things we've decided are important to do.
Yep.
Make sure that we're going to do them. Slightly different than the program manager who, of the things we decided to do along this portfolio, making sure that what we want to go out the door actually goes out the door. But these are slightly different. There's a small distinction between these roles and what the people should be focused on.
Right.
But not that the grouping is wrong.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And we should just stop saying PM because we mean too many things by it.
Right.
Yeah, I get confused too. So we've got 2 minutes. There's 4 bullet points. I'd love to, actually 5 if we count the 1.6 release proposal, which actually is just, I think people need to review offline and make comments.
I was hoping to just get a thumbs up on that. There seemed to be like a little bit of a few comments. Like, is this, should we have a release candidate branch a week before the actual release? And should we make the development cycle just a week longer? I think those were the 2 things. If you could write a comment on that maybe in the next couple of days so that we could finalize it if you have a strong opinion. Otherwise, we'll keep it as is.
And yeah, and so the other thing,
Candidates add more value than alpha versus beta. I'm trying to understand what we didn't accomplish with alpha and beta that a release candidate would accomplish.
Eric Toon was championing this. Does anyone else have a strong feeling or understand what the goal of the release candidate branch would be?
I think functionally it's a branding issue. If you say beta, people are like, oh, this might not get out there. Whereas if we say release candidate, there's some sort of implied warranty that we're actually trying to get it out. So I think that's really all we're talking about is relabeling roughly the same thing so that more people might be more likely to test it. But it's an unknown, it's a hypothesis at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Sarah. So speaking about like beta, you can feel that beta is like really finally ready to use product. If you're speaking about release candidate, it's like it's ready to use product. So in this stage, we can promote this version of Kubernetes to any people who are not like the end user consumers without any like public announcements and so on, but people who are writing blog posts, people who are using Kubernetes instead of marketing activities, people who consume Kubernetes for their own products can use this release candidate as like the final product of this iteration.
So we're at time.
So actually, before we move past the 1.6 proposal, just give some background on it. At the Cube Development Summit, it was announced that there wasn't a 1.6 release manager, and Google was looking for someone external to release it. It was something that I was interested in, so I put this proposal together. But ideally, I would get clarity that I would be that role just before I start doing a lot more work on it. So I was told that this would be the right forum to raise that and make sure that that's okay. And
I think we're pulling together a whole team. Saad, what is the last word you've heard on 1.6? Because I think we want a team and we want to move to a space where we can have people externally managing the release just as easily as Googlers. But at this point, we know we have tooling shortcomings.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the test infrastructure is very Google-centric, and the actual release cutting process is very Google-centric. All the other roles that were defined in that document can be taken over by other people, and the so-called release lead or manager or whatever doesn't necessarily have to be Googler, as long as those roles are fulfilled by Googlers. So I think it might be worthwhile as our first community meeting in 2017 to elect folks for that, all those roles.
Okay.
Does that work for you, Dan? It leaves you in limbo for another 2 weeks, but.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, so it makes it a little harder, but yeah, I mean, if I think that's the right process, then that's the way to do it.
It seems like a good one. And we are after time.
I'm sorry. I'm putting release team election in community as a community item for.
Or at least just a short discussion and yay, Dan volunteered. Because I suspect that's the way it's going to go. I don't want to get into now we will all vote and here are my expectations. And if we get to a spot where being release lead is that complicated and that desired, then we're going to be in an awesome space. Right now I see it as sort of penance. So thank you, Dan, for volunteering.
All right, so release team discussion and offering up Dan as a sacrificial leader. So there's a few things left. We can either roll through or call it and do it offline. Your call, since you're the organizer.
So I've got one point that I would like to make, and that's just me taking this moment as the organizer to choose the one topic that's listed in the last 4 to mention. Release timing. Can we make an effort next time, and this may just be a note to release teams, to line up the releases earlier in the day so that we can make sure we get press and blog coverage and all of that in a rolling cycle that works better than, oops, we didn't get it out last night because we didn't know, it's going to be more time on PR and blog post timing, even if it's just an effort to think about it. I know we were running up against the soft lockup and trying to get it out, so it got out when it did. But
yeah, the actual branch cutting or the release cutting process actually takes 5 hours. So if you kick it off, you got to kick it off first thing in the morning if you want it out.
Get up earlier, Saad. Jeez.
But the cool thing is that the Eng release team is thinking about doing a continuous release process where it's constantly building releases, and all you have to do is point at a particular release
and say, this is the one.
This is the one.
Right.
And
awesome.
then once that gets out the door, then we'll be in a lot better position to be able to
and that continuous release process will also be much more able to be handled by external Googlers, right?
Exactly.
Sweet.
Exactly.
Great.
The timing issue is a really important piece. So
it's really important, yeah.
What would be our ideal time for cutting the release?
Cutting it and publishing is usually 9 or 10 a.m. So it would be start the release, build before you go to bed, and then check to see if it's valid when you get up in the morning, kind of thing.
So the way the process works is once it's kicked off, it's going to go all the way through, and you can't kind of pause it.
So it goes to the push. So once you kick it off, it goes all the way through to sending the email and everything. Oh, okay.
Right.
All right.
Well, we can work on that. That'd be adjusted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, that is something that we want to do, and like I mentioned in the document, that's definitely the better way to go than to try to shoehorn getting the functionality to get external people to be able to do it. Just have the continuous. Anybody can send an ACK. People who are in charge can send an ACK to say yes, release that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that likely to be available by 1/6?
Possibly. No promises. Yeah.
Okay. And then is there a particular day that would be the ideal day? Because I think Friday we thought wasn't a really good.
I feel like this is an issue that needs to be filed on the GitHub release repo with a request for what specific time it needs to be cut by, and then we can work from there to figure out what tools need to be adjusted.
Yeah, we are over time on this meeting, so I think we're losing people as well. But these are all things that we will need to be figuring out. It's good to have the list of concerns, so.
Yeah, and thank you all so much. I'm continually impressed with the community and also how constructive people are. This is fantastic. Best team ever.
And of course, happy, let's see, solstice, Christmas, New Year's, Chinese New Year's. What else are we covering? Kwanzaa, Hanukkah. Yeah.
Whatever. You're all a bunch of jerks. I'll see you next year. It's cool.
Yeah. Have a non-denominational holiday of your choice.
Jason, thank you so much for moderating this. As usual, this has been very well moderated. I super appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Glad to do it, always.
Awesome. Thank you all. See you in the new year. Because no meetings next week.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Holiday.
Thank you all. Goodbye.